Hello and welcome to the current episode of Unboxing Russia. My name is Pradnya, and together with Ekaterina Schulmann, we are going to talk today about how diverse Russia and India are in the form that they exist today and how they have come to that point over the span of past few decades. I think the topic was in fact suggested to us by one of the viewers in the last episode, and he or she went on to make a suggestion in the comments that they would like us to address some diversity, how these kind of conversations work in these both countries which are so huge, so diverse, and yet somehow unified and work as a country.
And who still managed to stay together. And I must note that the comment section in our particular channel is always so informative and inspiring. There is this rule that you should never read comments, but we do, and we do not just read them, we take note of them.
Absolutely.
Some comments are pretty surprising.
Strange,
yeah, because there was quite recently this series of comments defending British imperial politics in times of the First World War, saying that people from India who didn't want to go and fight in the First World War,
who forced them?
They just didn't. It was all their free choice. So, defending the policies of the then King of England, which was a rather surprising subject for a bot or a troll. So maybe it was a real person who just took to heart these imperial policies. But generally, people write things that make sense, and they make suggestions which we then discuss between us. And
it's inspiring for us because it shows us how engaged the audience is with what we say and what we try to address. So
we decided to explain these basic facts about our relative countries, which are so big and so diverse that they almost seem like unified countries when you are out of them. But when you're inside, you are not so much in Russia as you are in Moscow or in Makhachkala, or you are in the Siberia, or you are in the Urals, or in the agrarian south, which is a whole different place, or in a National Republic or Far East. I don't know if that's the same thing with India, but you're also a pretty big country, aren't you?
I would like to say that as well. I think in terms of pure area, we're not as big as Russia is, but I think in terms of the diversity and in terms of the population size, because I think India is a place which is to large extent a habitable place. It doesn't have extreme weather conditions, which makes it a pretty human existence friendly space.
So the spread of the population is pretty even, isn't it?
I wouldn't say pretty even, because I think there are regions in the Himalayas up in the north, or even towards Jammu and Kashmir, Leh, Ladakh, which are not so densely populated, or even in the northeast, which is closer towards China. But I think I would still go out on a limb and say that with these notable exceptions, the population is still fairly evenly distributed. And of course, the desert regions on the northwestern part, which is Rajasthan. So, but otherwise, I think it's fairly evenly
generally the
spread.
Concentration of population is not extreme, because that's a very Russian thing. You might have seen these maps of the density of population where habitable places are pictured as mountains. And in case of Russia, we have two huge mountains, which is Moscow and Moscow agglomeration, St. Petersburg and St. Petersburg agglomeration, the so-called second capital, and we have some density in the agrarian south that I have mentioned, the borders of Black Sea. Otherwise, there's so much emptiness. I think that's not your case.
No, absolutely not. And I think in terms of sheer diversity, I think I brought it up in the last episode because I think we were talking a little bit about linguistic diversity.
Yes, about
and
languages.
There are 22 official languages plus English, so that's just the number of languages that we have to account for when it comes to the diversity within the Indian subcontinent.
How many time zones do you have?
Sorry?
How many time zones do you have?
Fortunately, we just have one time zone, but I think it was a very conscious choice.
How do you manage?
Yeah, sometimes
we have 11.
But you're also kind of a broadly spaced country.
Yes. Across the whole of northern Eurasia.
Yeah. So I think for us, it was a choice that we decided to stick to one time zone. But again, going back to the whole diversity conversation, I think in terms of religions, most of the religious denominations are well represented in India. And even if in terms of percentile, they may be small in air quotes, just through the sheer number of population that India has, they still end up being somewhere around a few 100,000 people, if not more. So one has to factor that in when you talk about diversity. And of course, I think the class system, the caste system, the way of life that it brings along with itself, again, contributes to the whole diversity. So I don't think you can go in India more than a span of 15 to 20 kilometers where the dialect doesn't change, the way people cook doesn't change, the way people speak doesn't change. Dressing sense is more or less quite okay. I think it doesn't change so often. But the sheer diversity that meets the naked eye without actually, having any anthropological background to decimate that data is still quite huge.
And if we look at the map of India, imagine a person who has just, for the first time in their life, seen this map. How is it divided? Because, there are certain types of divisions in different countries large enough to have divisions. Sometimes it's south versus north. Usually, for whatever reason, north is more industrial, is generally richer, and south is supposed to be poorer and more agricultural. The self-evident example is Italy, but other countries have the same kind of division as well. Sometimes it's west side versus east side, in which the western part is usually, again, richer and esteemed to be more civilized, the eastern part less so. Sometimes, and this, spoiler alert, is more the case of Russia, it is center versus the periphery. The centralized composition where resources agglomerate at certain number of points, and around it you have much, much poorer and sometimes more sparsely populated areas. How is it in India?
So I think in those terms, one has to also understand not just India, but also the neighborhood it is situated in. So if you look at the northwest and the northeast side of India, we have a very long border with Pakistan on the west side, and on the east side we have China. I think we are probably one of the few countries which has boots on the ground bordering to China, which is not very often the case. We have Bangladesh in the south of the northern part. So I think we are looking...
The south of the northern part looks confusing.
So in India looks like a rectangle, a tilted rectangle, and then there is this extension on the eastern side. So this extension on its south has Bangladesh, and on its north has China. And towards the east it has Myanmar.
And all those borders are the inheritance of the British Empire, of course.
Largely.
They are more or less artificial. Every border is artificial. None of it is natural. But you owe this composition to the division of British colonial territories.
Largely. Because I think the division of the subcontinent, which came into effect in 1947, has left its imprints even today. So Bangladesh, which was formerly East Pakistan and now exists as its own sovereign state today, were the byproducts of the partition.
Is it true that Pakistan is an acronym? It's a name composed of individual letters that mean something.
Could be, because I think the regions within Pakistan could have... Yeah, actually, I've never thought about it. I've somehow heard about it, but never really given it a second thought. But going back to the conversation on diversity, I think going back to 1947, when India became independent, one has to imagine that in addition to British India, which was a region, huge part of the subcontinent directly ruled by the British, and hence at their disposition they could kind of decide how to partition that region. We also had about 565 princely states which were directly ruled by rulers, kings, and who were somehow still in some kind of a contractual arrangement with the British Crown. So they were semi-autonomous.
So there were contracts, agreements
about protection.
Were they paying, I don't know, taxes?
They were. But as kind of a trade-off, they could also keep then some amounts of the gross domestic product. They could have some say in their own protection and how they see fit to run their empires. But in terms of their military ability, they had huge standing agreements with the British Empire. So when the British wanted to leave, they kind of gave the job to the incoming Indian government to figure out what to do with all these princely states. So imagine 565 princely states spread across the subcontinent, and out of which most of them ended up signing an instrument of accession to India. Few were indecisive at the beginning, wanted to consider either independence, or the ruler wanted to join one dominion, the population wanted the other. So that also led to some conflicts, but the most notable examples are that of Hyderabad, somewhere in southern India, and the second one, of course, Jammu Kashmir. So after having gone through that very laboring process of, 560 plus people you're trying to court to, get into the Union of India, and then trying to find a legal framework that works for this entire region, which somehow grants them a sense of belonging, which is something that we will also kind of end up talking about, kind of puts an abstract idea of what it means to belong to this Union of India, at the same time creating equal space for diversity. So I think that is something which is, in reality, something that one can ascribe to the big wins of the Indian Constitution, which to date, I think it is the second largest written legal document in the history of the world.
So it's a lengthy document.
It's a very lengthy document.
It must be much more than a declaration. Some constitutions are just that.
No, it's a very, very detailed
containing
document.
Very general provisions.
So I just looked up some numbers because I knew we were going to talk about this today. And in the original constitution, we had about 395 articles in 22 parts and 8 schedules. And as we speak today, we have a preamble. We have 470 articles, 25 parts, 12 schedules, and 5 appendix or 5 appendices. So just imagine the length of that legal framework.
You are certainly the largest democracy in the world.
We are. And I think it's also, purely in terms of a document, it's a very progressive document. One has to imagine that this was written in 1947. So this was a document which actually put a lot of emphasis on equality, which put a lot of emphasis on ensuring electoral equality. So women and men were both granted the adult franchise. The right to vote. So I think it abolished the caste system. Technically, the implementation is another part because there's also a resistance on the societal level. But purely in terms of a legal document, it continues to be one of the most.
So in terms of rights, citizens are equal.
The citizens are equal. And I think barring the exception of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, there was a specific article 370, which was in the Indian Constitution. All the states are also equal. So there is no specific...
Is India constitutionally a federation? Or is it a unitary
It's a union of India, but it works according to the principle of federal structures.
Which means that territories can elect their own governments?
Yes, barring the exception of the union territories. We have 8 union territories which are directly governed by the center.
Are they close to the center?
No.
Why are they union territories?
I think
and
partly
some
because they are
not?
very critical to national security. So some of them are also in the Arabian Sea or in the Indian Ocean. There are small patches of the islands. The state of Jammu and Kashmir, which initially had a special status, then was divided and parts of it have become a union territory now. So again, critical to national security because on the one hand you have Pakistan, on the other you have China. So it's actually a bottleneck. But I think barring that, the states are they have their own, they can do their own thing. And going back to the whole...
And heads of the states, are they called governors? Or
the nominal head would be the governor. It's more of a decorative office like the president's office, but the real person running the show is the chief minister at a state level and the prime minister at a national level.
So they are parliamentary democracies, right?
Yeah.
So they elect
we have a
parliaments
bicameral
and
system.
parliaments form regional governments.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a real federation. So how are you divided? Coming back to the beginning of my question, is it rich west versus poor east?
I think it is divided
Is
now.
It closer? The closer to the capital, the better. The further, the poorer, or the other way around.
I think that's where I digressed a little. I wanted to say that the regions which have traditionally known a lot of upheaval, which is the border regions, Punjab and Bengal on the other side, despite having a lot of natural abundance, they have not really had the chance to express abundance in terms of their economic well-being up until a few years ago. partly because of partition, and then Bengal especially because of the influx of refugees from Bangladesh in the 1970s and in the run-up to 1971. So traditionally, Delhi has been the center of power, and Bombay, which is in my state, in the western part of India, in Maharashtra, has been the financial capital.
And what is New Delhi?
New Delhi is the seat of the power. So the central government sits in New Delhi.
So there's Delhi and New Delhi.
Yeah, so Delhi, old Delhi, and New Delhi is kind of the administrative part.
Territorially, are they close?
Yeah,
Is it kind of, it's like old city and then new city, but it's the same kind of
So
city.
there is the national capital territory. So New Delhi is the center of power. Bombay is the financial power. And in terms of industrial power, I think it's fairly divided across Western India, Southern India, and agricultural strength would be Punjab. Then you have the southern states, including my state. What is quite interesting is the central states and the eastern part of India, which is states of Orissa. You have Madhya Pradesh, which is in the right bang in the center, are actually very rich in minerals and rare and not rare earth, because that's that's the fancy word you use these days.
No, we are not
but
using
they're
this.
very rich in terms of natural resources, but are also home to some of the most vulnerable tribal communities. So those areas have also been in a persistent conflict with the governments, because they have to give up their tribal lands, they have to give up their ancestral homes to make space for the governments to then come in and extract those minerals or those natural resources. So they have somehow continued to be not so well in terms of their economic well-being. Also went through different phases of unrest, with especially between the tribal communities, the communists who were supporting the guerrillas against the Indian state. But I think otherwise, mostly the economic well-being has kind of, trickled through. What is very interesting in India, and this may be very interesting for some of the people who are listening to this, is the two Indian states which have democratically elected communist governments, or had. One of them has had a very interesting relationship with communism. One of them went on to become one of the most rich states across India, which is Kerala. And the other one has, had its ups and downs, which is West Bengal. But those two states had very regularly elected communist governments in a democratic fashion and in free and fair elections. So
if I'm the one asking silly first grade questions in this episode for whatever reason, I have another one. Do some states have separatist tendencies except Jammu and Kashmir that we all know about? Is separatism generally a thing in India?
Not right now, not anymore. It has had its own phases. So Punjab, for instance, in the 1980s was a very, very violent space, and also led to the assassination of the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, because she ordered the army to march into one of the holiest shrines of Sikhism, which is the Golden Temple, and that was being held siege by the separatists. And it's quite interesting today that the separatist movement for Punjab, which is called Khalistan, or the Khalistani movement, still has a lot of strong support amongst the diaspora, which lives in Canada, which lives in the UK. In India, it keeps popping up its head every now and then, but I don't think it's as violent as it was in the 80s.
And what contributed to this decline in separatist tendencies?
I think a lot of people also started bearing or being the beneficiaries of the impacts of globalization. Because till the 90s, the Indian market was closed. And then they went on to open the markets, liberalize the economy.
But rupee is still non-convertible.
That's true, but I think it's still...
And this protects your internal markets, of course.
It does. And I think India has also kind of been very smart about how it has structured its financial markets. So,
for example, you are paying with rupees for the Russian oil, and then we'll have to convert it into something by buying your goods, because we can do nothing else with all this mass of rupees, which is pretty smart.
And I think it has also kind of helped us stay resilient.
If I were the Russian government, I would buy your tea-producing regions.
Yeah.
Are they the rich ones, actually? Assam and Darjeeling, are they well off? As
Probably,
regions?
but not the other smaller northeastern states, and they have also had their brushes with violence. Not specifically in terms of wanting to break away from the Union of India, but in terms of the internal ramblings about which caste and which community gets to have the say. Because the northeastern states are also comprised of lots of tribal communities, which are quite different from the tribal communities you would find in the heart of India, which is in the central and the eastern regions.
In terms of religion, these are the Hindu places. So
not all
which
of
of them are the Muslim places? Because I understand, again, and this I kind of got from our previous conversation about languages, is that the religious difference is the main division in Indian society.
But also language.
But you have so many different languages. It's not like you have a majority language and some minority languages.
No, but I think the whole reorganization of the states after the British left was done on linguistic lines. And it was not on religious lines. The partition was on the religious lines.
Yes.
But in terms of the concentration of populations, I think Jammu and Kashmir, or rather the Kashmir Valley, has a huge concentration of Muslim people. Then there are pockets like the city of Hyderabad is a huge, which is somewhere in the south, has a fair amount of concentration of Muslims. There are pockets in and around Kerala, in and around Tamil Nadu, also in Maharashtra, which is my home state. And I think so in terms of their religion, they are fairly spread across. In the South India, you would also find a lot of Christians.
Are they Protestants or Catholics?
All kinds. Like Syrians, you have Syrian Christians, you have Catholics.
Syrians can be Orthodox, like Russians.
Yeah. So I think we are well covered there. So I think it's not just necessarily on religious lines. For all you know, a Muslim in Maharashtra might have more in common with a Hindu in Maharashtra than a Muslim in Kerala. Because their cultural baggage is similar.
And that's what I wanted to ask. Are regional affiliation important for an identity of a person in India? Do they say, I am from this place and this kind of marks the person as belonging to this place? Or is that not so important? Because in Russia, there's this thing about, were you born in Moscow? And that is a whole different case. Or where are you from? And there's this specific phrase that we all use when we're asked the question. We say, I myself am from this place. And again, it's a turn of the phrase that you use in no other context. And you're using it without even thinking about it. Ya sama or ya sam from the I myself. I as myself. I am from.
As my individual.
Yeah. Yes. So this is a very specific identification. But this has more to do with our central division, which is, again, center versus everybody else. We are a country of hyper concentration of population. So we have those two capitals and their huge agglomerations that kind of suck in human resources from all the surrounding territories and then from many other territories as well. Is there anything like that in India? Do you resent capital-born people? Do people born in the capital do they make a boast of there being this?
So, like I said, because
city dwellers.
Because I think the power is concentrated in Delhi and the money is concentrated in Bombay or Mumbai, as we call it now. There are these stereotypes of people living in south of Bombay.
What does it mean?
Which is the social elite, and
who have a
very specific way of, the way they lead their lifestyles, or even South Delhi, which is then usually the area where you would have all kinds of people working in politics, politicians themselves, all the diplomatic enclaves. So this is the fancy part
So
of the
the
city.
southern is the fancy part.
In both the cities, yes.
Interesting.
But otherwise, I would not say there's a huge divide between urban and rural population. That for sure. But I think India also has by now some of the biggest cities ever on the face of this earth. So I would not say that the differentiation is only in these two cities. I think it's usually a divide between the urban and the rural space, and the semi-urban space is a very interesting point of confluence because they're literally sitting on the fence.
Do people recognize accents from different
Absolutely.
places?
But the accents...
So can they identify a stranger by the way they speak?
So let me put it this way. When you tell someone your name with your surname in India, it's like leaving behind a visiting card. So people would know what region you come from. People can predict what kind of caste affiliation you have, what religion you belong to.
So you have a certain set of names that belongs to this or that region and caste?
Especially surnames.
Surnames.
So depending on what kind of a surname I tell you, people will be like, so you're from Maharashtra. Oh, so you're Gujarati. And it's like, it doesn't take us even a few seconds to process that. It just comes very automatically. Which has its downsides, because I think it's very easy for me to, say it in a very nonchalant manner and say that, it's so cool that we have this system. But people who come from marginalized communities, for them it actually works as a big issue, because...
Can a family from what you call a marginalized community name their child with a elite first name?
The first name they could, but the last name is usually the one that gives away a lot of things. So there are people who...
Because these divisions, they exist in every society, and you know that in England or in the States, you have the redneck names or the
blue blood names.
Yeah, the blue collar names, the white collar names, the aristocratic names, etc. It is more or less the same thing in Russia. Yes, there are certain names that belong to different stratas of society, and the Russian can generally try to guess the nationality of a person from their surname, and they quite often guess wrong, because during the 20th century the country became so mixed, and our map, also the population map, is defined by this history of the 20th century, where masses of people were moved around by the government, by the war, by hunger, by exile, by deportations, etc. So it is not very often that a Russian person is currently living in a place where their parents were born. To say nothing of the place where they were born. But again, I'm not, my brother is not. Among my school fellows, most have left the city where we were living. And if I look at my grandparents, the majority of them only came to the city where I was born and where they met each other and married after the Second World War.
So if I were to ask you in a very, very simple way, would you say Russia has more in common amongst its citizens, or is it as diverse as it comes? Like, is there something that binds you together where you say, oh, that's so Russian? Or you would say, I would not say that for the whole of Russia. Like for India, I would say if someone tells you one fact about India, you have to assume that exactly at that point of time in space, wherever you are, the exact opposite of that also holds true.
It's also true.
So, and the reality is somewhere in between. So you have these two extremes that have been then marked by these two people, and the reality is somewhere in between. So there is no unified version of what it feels like to be in India.
Where did the name come from? Was it always India? Did the British
It comes from the Indus Valley civilization.
From the river.
And partly also because of the Persian influence. So in the Persian influence, it would be called Hind. And then, it kind of evolved into a word.
Do people call themselves Indians?
Yeah.
So if asked, who are you?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think we have reached that point where we would say I am, like we would identify ourselves with our religious denomination, or even if you're amongst an Indian community, then you will bring up your regional affiliation, where you would say I'm Gujarati, or I'm Tamil, or I'm Maharashtrian. But you attended an event with me a few days ago, and we had a huge group of people. Someone was from Tamil Nadu, someone was from my home state, then we had someone from Bengal, And
somebody
New Delhi,
had at least a hoodie with New Delhi University inscribed on his back.
Exactly. So we had like 4 or 5 different regions in that space. So amongst ourselves, we would say that. But if you were to ask me, who are you? My first response would be, I'm Indian.
I see. So coming back to Russia and its diversity and unity at the same time, I must say that I have painted this picture of a huge, diverse country spreading across the whole of the continent, 11 time zones, all these things we love to brag about, polar zone down to the fertile valleys of the Black Sea. But in fairness, I must mention that there's a very opposite opinion saying that Russia is not diverse at all, that more than 80% of population are ethnic Russians, or at least identify as such, that about 80% of population identify as Russian Orthodox Christians. So it's a big country populated by ethnic Russians, the majority of whom are in their turn Orthodox Christians. All the other are minorities, so this diversity is just Soviet propaganda. Maybe it was true when we had 50 sister republics composing the Soviet Union, but now it's just Russia, the country of Russians. There is some foundation below this idea. Indeed, if you ask people who are they, 80+% will say we are Russians. And the one thing that really unites the country, I will later perhaps cite a sociological survey, which I find interesting. But the first fact is that, again, thanks to the Soviet heritage, we have a unified system of schooling, secondary education, which is obligatory and free. Again, de facto, not so much, but if you go in theory, if you go to a state school, you are not charged. You may be charged for something extra, but not for the schooling, etc. And this is why, although we have dialects and accents, and that's why I asked you this question: can you tell what region the person is from by the way they speak? Because in Russia we make much of those different accents or slight variations of wording, specific regional terms. There's a lot of fun and jokes around all this, but generally Russian language is surprisingly unified for a language of so large a territory. In England, which is way smaller, I think there's much more variety of dialects than in Russia. And that is because, again, for 2 reasons: schools and television.
So if I remember rightly, in the last episode when we spoke about disinformation, and I brought up this one very peculiar YouTube thing that I came across, which like for a variety of reasons was propagating disinformation about the reasons why Russia invaded into Ukraine.
To protect Russian speakers.
Yeah. So, and I remember vividly that you said that they also have a different linguistic heritage. So would you say that Russian as a language is considered far superior than the languages that are spoken in provinces or in certain parts of the country? Or are they all at an equal footing?
No, they're not. And we discussed this last time. There are so-called national languages belonging to national republics. And here I think we must say a few words about the constitutional composition of our country as well. Russia, de jure, is a federation. It is composed of a variable number of regions. Sometimes we annex them. Sometimes we unite those that were divided within the country. So now it's 85 regions, but they are not created equal. Some of them are just regions or oblasts, like my native Tula Oblast. And these are mostly Russian territories populated by ethnic Russians. There are national republics, like Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, Tiva, Kalmykia, various others, or the national republics of Northern Caucasus, like Chechnya, Dagestan, Kabardino-Balkaria, etc. There are also autonomous regions. These are usually smaller and situated in the far north or in the far east, like this curious leftover of the Stalinist ethnic policy, the Jewish independent, autonomous territory. There are almost no Jews there, but it
anymore.
Well, It was created in the late Stalinist times, and evidently there was an idea to have a deportation and to move all the Jewish population, which was, of course, mostly living in cities, over there so that they can have their own
ghetto.
Yeah,
for lack of
their
better
own
word.
kind of independent territory and autonomy. But autonomy is situated where people don't live. In the far east. And we also have the so-called federal cities, or literally cities of federal importance, which is rather closer to your union territories, but they also elect their own mayors. Some of them are called governors. We have now 3 of these. We have Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Sevastopol, which is the capital of Crimea. Again, de jure, all those territories elect their own heads, but the president of Russia sends 3 candidates, 3 candidatures to these territories, and then you're free to elect whomever you want. But in political reality, there's an appointee sent from Moscow or elected from among the regional elites, and then they're meeting with the president, and the president says, well, I support you on the next elections, but of course it's for the people to decide. And then everybody knows that they'll need to get a decently high percentage of votes, but no higher than the president got during the last presidential elections in the same territory. Otherwise, it's considered impolite. So much for our Russia being a federation. But although, again, the language is more or less the same with very slight variations, ethnic Russians are a majority, of course, but still I would insist that Russia is a highly diverse country because divisions are not so much ethnic or even religious, although we have that too, as socio-economic. There are different classifications done by economists, regional geographers, sociologists, or political scientists. They are quite fascinating. There's the kind of simplistic, but also rational division. The author is a well-known Russian economist, Alexander Auzan, from the Moscow State University, and he divided the country into K-Russia and I-Russia. K-Russia is collective Russia, and I-Russia is individual Russia. So first you have the country of collective values, traditional values per se, and these are the regions, the provinces, the national republics, etc. And you have big cities and city agglomerations where life is more individualized, people are more atomized, they do not belong so much to clans or tribes or even regions. A lot of them have moved into this place, into this city in search of a better life. So it's a community which resembles closer its peer or sister communities in the West when this provincial Russia. This is what Russians mean when they say Moscow is not Russia. Although with this hyper concentration that I have also mentioned, more and more people are actually coming to these centers. Russia is not just a country of cities, we are a country of big cities. We have 15 to 18 million plus cities, which with their agglomeration make for the majority of the country's productive capacity, the majority of its GDP, the majority of its, information space is made up of things that are produced, spoken, written, painted in those places. They are the places of progress. Well, they're the places of production generally. If you want a more compartmentalized classification, we have the one belonging to our perhaps most famous regional geographer, economic geographer, Natalia Zubarevich. And this is the theory of 4 Russias. These 4 Russias are first metropolitan cities, the big cities that I have mentioned. Second, it's the industrial cities of Urals and Siberia, cities where you have industries, big industries, and also universities. Then you have urban Russia, which is mostly in the south, where you can grow something. Agricultural Russia, this is Russia number 3. And you have Russia number 4, which is the Russia of national republics, especially Northern Caucasus, with its own culture, much more tribal, much more Muslim, where religion plays a role, where young people are much more religious than in the other places. I have also seen, I have read about divisions which are even more detailed, like 5 Russias. For example, yes, there's Moscow and St. Petersburg. There are those educated industrial and university cities. There are also cities which may be as big as, for example, Yekaterinburg, which belongs to the second category, but which are more provincial in a sense, and their political culture is more loyalist. Because we have, again, if we look at the electoral map, we have regions which tend to lean to a protest voting. And these are the north remembers, northwest, cities like Yekaterinburg, which I have mentioned, also cities in the far east, which feel themselves to be divided from Moscow by thousands of kilometers. They're much closer to Japan. Of course, Tokyo is closer than Moscow for them, and they all drive Japanese cars. And people who live there are, again, people who may not have been born there, or whose parents have not been born there. By the way, there are a lot of ethnic Ukrainians in these far eastern regions. So they are more likely to protest. They're more likely to vote for an oppositional candidate. Navalny was a successful political presence there in places like Tomsk or Novosibirsk, which is in the north. But this Russia number 3, the provincial Russia, which I belong to, it has a more loyalistic, more passive political culture.
But is it also a Russia of abundance? Like no. In terms of financial abundance? In
terms of financial wealth, there's a huge gap, a precipice between Moscow and everybody else, even between Moscow and St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg is a big city. It's a city of cultural heritage. It's one of the most beautiful cities on the face of the earth. And I'm saying it, I've seen a lot of them. It's like a vision. It's like Venice, but with worse climate. By the way, when I went to Italy, when I saw Venice for the first time, the resemblance is striking. They are both imaginary cities, cities built in the worst possible place, in the swamp, and beautiful, again, as a vision. And they are cities with their own understanding of their slightly fantastic nature, where architecture is an identity. So, I'm waxing poetical. Coming back to regional geography. In terms of wealth, we have, again, Moscow and then everybody else. We have big productive cities which are not cities of central Russia, the ethnic Russians, which are poorer. In terms of demographic, they are older. And Moscow sucks their blood.
Why?
Because
to maintain power?
No, people go to Moscow because they'll live better. It sucks the human resources. I'm an example. Again, my classmates are an example. We move to Moscow and then we move somewhere else.
I think it's also trajectory. Do you think it's also a deliberate way of, consciously not creating opportunities for people where they are?
Perhaps.
To kind of, keep them in the smallest periphery as possible, to control them in a better fashion.
But if you are further than, I would say, 300 kilometers from Moscow, then you are your own Moscow. For example, if you're Yekaterinburg, that I have mentioned several times already, then you serve as a center for the surrounding country. And people come to you, young people, ambitious people, people who want to do something, they will come to you. Also, we have smaller but richer places situated around, sitting on natural resources. They are in the north, places like Tyumen, places like Khanty-Mansiysk or Yakutsk, where it's hard to live because the climate is outrageous, but they're swimming in money. Not everybody, but the salaries and also the prices are as high as in Moscow. But Moscow is the real agglomeration point of the resources of the whole country.
And the fourth Russia?
So the fourth Russia, again, according to this 5 Russias rather than 4 Russias classification, is exactly these sparsely populated but rich places where people are even more adventurous because they live in this hostile climate. They make money. They don't feel rooted in the place because they came there to make money. They will probably move to more friendly climes when they want to retire. Their political power is concentrated in the industries. It's the chief industry that is ruling the land. So the electoral system will be nominal, but Moscow will have to reckon with and cooperate with the industrial barons of this place. It is not necessarily so far north. For example, places like Chelyabinsk, one of the industrial centers of Russia, may belong to the same category. So,
and the fifth Russia?
And the fifth Russia is, yes, the Russia of national republics, where political ruling is done by tribes and chieftains. There's no going around this. It is this way in Northern Caucasus. It is more civilized in larger and more densely populated places like Tatarstan or Bashkortostan, but there the important things are the families. So
to the clan, in a way.
Clan, yes, the family, the tribe. Also, elections are possible. Political culture is not that solidified, but elections give legitimacy to the family division that was there in the first place.
And you haven't seen a rise of any separatist tendencies or aspirations in these areas because they are so diverse and they have their own way of life, they have their own understanding of what culture is. Even political culture, I guess. Right.
But for Tatarstan and Bashkortostan, who are rich and who have their own, for example, oil resources, it would have been possible to contemplate independence if they were not locked in the surrounding Russian territories. The Northern Caucasian republics are always at least perceived as dangerous places by the federal center because, again, the religion is different, young people are religious, there are ideas floating around, there are always memories of hostilities with the Russian center. In case of Chechnya, there's a very fresh memory of devastating war, 2 wars in fact, but they are poor. They live by federal budgeting. Generally, the economic inequality is so great that it serves as justification for the highly centralized budgetary policy of Russia. What Moscow says is this: yes, I take all your resources, I tax you for all you can give me, and I gather those resources in the center, but then I give you back, and I try to level as far as possible those inequalities. You would not survive otherwise, or the differences will be so dramatic that it would rip the country apart. There's always a fear, very present fear in the Russian elites, that Russia will somehow disintegrate the way Soviet Union disintegrated. These are very recent events, historically speaking. Soviet Union was there for 70 years, and then it just fell apart. Russia, with all our talk of 1,000 years history, we all have that, is actually 30 years old. So the idea that if we do not hold it together with an iron hand, it will somehow spread apart like a piece of rotten cloth, is always present. I do not know how much of this is self-serving paranoia. Of course, you need justification to rule a country which is the Euro Federation in this very unitary manner, to stamp out the last remains of, say, local self-government. The recent legislative changes have done away with whatever was there still, to in fact appoint the governors and to allow the governors to appoint the mayors. You need justification for all that. So what you say to yourself and to the public is that if I don't do that, the country falls apart and then you'll be lost the way you were lost in the early 90s when the Soviet Union fell apart. I think personally, both as a citizen and as a political scientist, that federalization is one of the first things that need to be done in the country, that the country that is really so diverse, and I continue to insist that it is diverse, needs self-government. Perhaps municipal self-government, local self-government is the first, because it's the basis. People need to elect their own mayors. Russia is an urban country. And this is a hugely popular demand that crops up despite all the level of repression here and there. Now we have, I think, only 3 out of those 85 capitals of the subjects of the Russian Federation who can elect their mayor directly.
Wow, that's very, very low.
Oh, yes. And again, not so many years ago, everybody could do that. And then one by one, by introducing legislative changes, all that was done away with.
But to flip the coin, then, despite all of this, there seems to be some kind of peace or reckoning with your present, where you say, this is where we are. So we take it with a pinch of salt and say that, we all belong together. So what does that belonging look like? What is it that gives you a sense that, oh, all of us are Russians, we are in this together? I can speak about India, but later, but first...
I will ask you about India, because it's so interesting to try to find out. It sounds such a simple question, but it is a very tricky one to form into a topic for a survey or a poll or a scientific study. I am familiar with the sociological survey which tried to answer this question: what is it that holds the country together? What are the mutually acceptable, whatever, symbols, practices? And what they came up with is this. They tried to find out what again, behavioral practices or symbols or institutions are both recognizable to the majority, that is known and accepted or approved by the majority. So we need to find out something that everybody knows, or well, the majority knows and the majority accepts. Or thinks is a good thing. Let's put it in as simple terms as we can. So what they came up with, surprisingly few items. The first I've already named, Russian language. It's a language of general communication. It remains the language of communication for the whole post-Soviet space. If the current Russian authorities were not so stupid with their soft power instruments, we could bind this whole Eurasian space together on the virtue of Russian language alone. Everybody has studied it at school. So people from Tajikistan and Estonia can talk together in Russian, only they don't want to, thanks to our wise policies, but they could. And it's such an asset. So Russian language first, known to everybody, approved as a good thing. Second, 2 holidays that are celebrated by everybody and celebrated in more or less the same manner. New Year and Victory Day, the 9th of May. But there are issues. New Year is generally acceptable, and it is very much a unifying ritual because people do the same kind of thing. There are certain movies that you watch, there's certain kind of food that you cook, there are certain things that you do when the clock strikes 12, you need a champagne, you need to wait for the Kremlin clock, then you click the glasses and you make a wish, etc. There's a certain sacred Russian salad that everybody does. So this is a unifying thing. But 9th of May is more problematic. It was a unifying celebration for decades. It was a kind of secular Easter celebration, the remembrance of the dead. It was the day when Russians went to visit their families' graves on a cemetery, because this is the time, the beginning of May, when for the majority of Russian territory, the snow goes away at last, so you can come and clean up on a cemetery. And of course, you remember your fallen, because the Second World War was such a disaster that every family has somebody. So, but not even starting Putin's time, but starting 1995, when the first military parade, the first post-Soviet military parade, was held on the 9th of May, this holiday became highly politicized. And during the late Putin years, the main slogan changed from, and this is a quotation from a well-known song, a holiday with a celebration with tears in our eyes, праздник со слезами на глазах, to, we can repeat it, можем повторить the famous unofficial slogan of the new kind of 9th of May celebration. It became a militarized, politicized, and divisive rather than united holiday. So when we look at the polls and when we ask people what holiday is most important in your year, we see New Year on the rise and the 9th of May on decline, especially among the younger generations. So again, sadly, because we have so few of these unifying things, this particular one, which was forged in historical memory, was spent, was burned for political gain, for short-term political gain. Third, a number of quotations, mutually recognizable quotations, not so much now even from the classic Russian literature as from a certain number of Soviet songs and films that everybody has seen.
Culture.
Popular culture, yes. Late Soviet popular culture. Again, songs and movies. This also belongs more to the elder generation.
Would that also include some movies from India?
Yes. By the way, yes. And in the very end, I'm going to ask you the silliest question of all. I'm just keeping this for the end of our conversation. So this is what people recognize. This is what you quote, and they quote you back, and you know that you are both Russians. And the fourth item, the president. He's been around for a long time, for a quarter of a century, so people could memorize his name and face, and it is a socially accepted thing to approve of him. He's generally approved. It's a sign of loyalty. So if you look at those four things, what do you notice? First, it's so little. And second, all those four things, except maybe the Russian language, belong to the elder generations. When they go, and
that's when the challenge will come.
Yes, exactly. There are people grown up, for whom not just the New Year is more important than the 9th of May, but for whom the New Year movie is Home Alone or Terminator 1, rather than some Soviet classic. So what happens in the next 15 years? The president will not be around, no matter what. These Soviet songs will be the heritage of the 60 plus. So what do we have? The Olivier salad that we make every New Year, herring under the fur coat, that's the exotic name for another New Year staple. And yes, the Russian language which we were taught at school, and the knowledge of who Tolstoy is.
That's a standardized version of Russian language.
Yes, it's a standard, the so-called literally literatурный Russian language. Again, we pronounce it in different manner. My native city is only 200 kilometers south of Moscow, but I pronounce the sound g, in a slightly softer manner than the Moscovites. And if you go further south, it becomes softer and softer still, and then you go to Ukraine, and you have the so-called frikativное this very soft, very characteristic sound, which makes a Russian recognize a Southern Russian or a Ukrainian. So I'm not saying that we are in that big trouble, the country will fall apart in the next quarter of a century. I'm just saying that for a country so large and spread so thinly in terms of population over
but yet so vast.
Yes, over such a large chunk of land, we have frighteningly few things to hold us together. Economically speaking, it makes sense for this part of Eurasia to stick together. Roads, production, economical connectivity, infrastructure, etc. So separatism is expensive and often bloody. Again, always expensive and often bloody. So again, in terms of just economic rationale, it makes sense to stick together. But you need more than economic rationale to keep a country unified. So in your case, what are your mutually recognizable symbols? Do you have holidays where everybody, all these billion of plus people, do the same thing in the same hour?
So we have two national holidays to begin with, which are of that relevance, which is 15th August 1940, or no, 1947 is not a holiday anymore, but 15th of August, which is the Independence Day, and the 26th of January, which is the Republic Day, the day on which the Union of India adopted the Indian Constitution, and it came into power. So I think these two are holidays of national significance in a way, but we also have a series of national holidays which are more religious in nature. So we have holidays for Eid, we have holidays for Diwali, we have holidays for Holi, for Ganesh festival, for Durga Puja.
Do you have different types of food for each of them?
Of course. Good. But I think I was just thinking about it. So you said, we have frighteningly less things that bind us in your context. And I think that actually works for us. Because I think you asked me before, what works for people in India to create that notion of belonging. And I think technically or historically so far, the beauty of being an Indian is that you have a few things in common, like a joint sense of history in a way. Not always, because of course the class and the caste makes it difficult. Being a minority makes it difficult, but in a broader sense, like you had the British who had come from the outside, they had colonized you. So your enemy kind of gives you having a common enemy.
Your identity, yeah.
So I think that helped forge a bond of a shared history. And like I said at the beginning of this episode, I think the Indian Constitution leaves so much space for people to be as different as they come.
So you are a true federation.
So you don't kind of try to enforce a particular variant of what it means to be an Indian. There's no, and I actually worked on this in my PhD thesis, where I looked at if there is a hierarchical construct of what it means to be an Indian, or if there is space for you to be so many things in one breath. And I think historically we have had that we could be so many things in one go. There have been attempts at different junctures in history where there have been people who have tried to create a very unified, monolithic understanding of what it means to be an Indian, hierarchical in a way. But I think even if you were to take one parameter and say that, let's make this as the decisive parameter, I think it still would not work, because we are so diverse in terms of the population that people would not take it.
And you don't have a movie that everyone has seen?
We have some of those, but I think even in popular culture, we have just such diversity that people, for instance, in South India would not necessarily say that, I've seen this movie from the 50s and I identify myself with that. For all you know, a Russian from that generation identifies more with that film than someone coming from South India.
Indian movies were hugely popular in Soviet Russia. And now I need to ask my silly question in the conclusive part of our conversation.
Go for it.
We have been so clever. Now let's be stupid for a change. There is a phrase that is known to everyone who's been a child in the Soviet Union. And it sounds like that: Hindi, Rusi, Bhai. It is supposed to mean Indians and Russians friendship. Does it mean anything at all?
Our brothers. Bhai is a brother.
But why is it repeated twice? What's the correct way of saying this?
It's a linguistic thing. So we are brothers of each other in a way,
Mm-hmm. So how do you pronounce it correctly?
Hindi, Rusi, Bhai.
So that's not so far from the version that I know from my kindergarten childhood.
No.
Very good. Bhai. Excellent. Thank you for this clarification. And with this, I think we are going to conclude this conversation, which was as diverse as its two huge subjects. We have managed to cover a lot of ground.
And if you would like us to cover something specific, either as a continuation of our conversation today, but also independent of that, do let us know in the comments, and we'll try to consider it.
Your comments are always welcome. Our comment section is the best on the internet.
Yeah, because I think we comment a lot during the episode, so we have that opportunity to kind of, let you in on our streams of consciousness. But otherwise, let us know what your thoughts are, and we'll be happy to think about it. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.